Any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move right along. And we had forwarded item 17B and C onto today. This is the Area 10 Mule Deer Body Condition Analysis. Game biologist Tony Wasley. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning. I've got a quick PowerPoint project, so just give me a couple seconds to...
I'll stay there, Rob, and look at you.
I was wrong. I was stuck with the other leg. What's the ball horse?
You all right? That's in focus for everyone?
Yeah.
Just good.
Clears everything we've heard.
Well, today has the very real potential of being one of the few days that could be actually easier to be a deer biologist than a bear biologist. I'm going to take a seat here if you don't mind, so I don't block anybody's view. For those of you unfamiliar with this agenda item, there's a little bit of history here. 2009, the department had a somewhat controversial antlerless deer hunt in the Ruby Mountains. This PowerPoint kind of discusses some of the history and subsequent analyses that came out of that. Quick and dirty history. As we all know, we had peak mule deer populations in Nevada in 1988. Area 10, the area in question here, conformed to that pattern as well. We had a 100-year weather event in the winter of 92-93. Following that winter of 92-93, we had continued depressed sample size in our surveys in Area 10. Those surveys were conducted in the fall and the spring of each year, and we had depressed fawn recruitment in a portion of the Area 10 as well. In 2004, the department undertook a predator management project, and it was Project 17 in a portion of that area. Following 5 years of predator management, the department had a single year of antlerless harvest in there, collected the data, and have analyzed much of the data. And so much of what we'll talk about here today is what that analysis has revealed, at least preliminarily. Quick and dirty on the predator management project. We've been through this several times. I don't want to belabor the point. Basically what we did, this is Area 10 in central Elko County. This is Unit 101, 107, and 105, 102, 103, 108, 104. We had predator management in this portion, not in this portion. Some of the justification again was that we had low sample size for mule deer. What this graph shows, this yellowish line here represents the area to the south that I just showed you, the 102, 103, 104, 108 portion, and this bluish line represents the area to the north, the 101, 105, 107. So part of the justification for the predator management project in there was we had a relatively consistent magnitude of difference between the 102 group and the 101 group. Here's the winter 92, 93, and from about 97, 98, we saw this inverse relationship where the sample sizes in the 102 group got larger and larger and larger, and these were record samples in here. And in the group to the north, the 101 group, they continued to decline. Part of our hypothesis was, well, perhaps these depressed levels coming out of 92, 93 allowed this population to be put into what we call a predator pit, continually suppressed by high predator numbers in that area. That was a portion of the hypothesis. The other aspect of it was that we had persistent differences in fawn ratios between those two areas. What these two lines again show, this yellowish line is the portion to the south, the 102 group, and the blue line here is the portion to the north where we implemented the predator control project. And again, coming out of 92, 93, prior to that, we actually had higher fawns for a couple years. Probably not significant differences here. These are probably pretty much the same. But then we had a period of 10 years where only 1 year in 10 did the fawn ratio, the fall fawn ratio in the area to the north actually exceed what we had to the south. So that was the other part of the hypothesis, that along with predator pit, we had low recruitment in the area, and we thought perhaps aggressive predator management might reverse that trend. Although there may have been some benefit from the predator removal activities, statistical analysis by UNR was unable to detect population level effects. I'm not saying that this did not have benefit and this did not work, but what UNR recommended through their analysis was that to really understand how mule deer populations are regulated, whether we're talking about predator control, top-down control or bottom-up control. Top-down meaning the predators control the ungulates, which controls the vegetation, versus bottom-up, which is the habitat controls prey densities, which control predator. That more data on deer responses and population dynamics would be helpful. In particular, they talked about the physical condition of the animals, pregnancy and fetal rates, and survivorship first month and to 6 months of life to determine if mortality is additive or compensatory. So they also suggested data on range condition, forage availability, and felt that the data would provide information on population density relative to carrying capacity, which will be denoted as K. Also increase our understanding of how these populations are regulated. So when we talk about life history characteristics related to carrying capacity, there's kind of a continuum here. This is the characteristic. So we say physical condition of adult females in a population that's below maximum sustainable yield, or let's just say a population below carrying capacity. The physical condition of the does is going to be better than in a population at or near carrying capacity. So there's several different things here. Pregnancy rate of adult females. You have higher pregnancy rates when you're below carrying capacity, lower when you're at. And I mean, these terms are subjective: better, poorer, higher, lower. It's all relative. But in the absence of any data, you don't know where you are. So at a very minimum, by going out and evaluating some of these things, you at least establish a baseline for one area. You can compare in subsequent years. If you know it's a really bad year, you can compare. If you know it's a really good year, you can compare. So at a very minimum, the department wanted to at least establish a baseline for several of these things. Pause in annual production by adult females. That's just to say that perhaps they wouldn't reproduce every year. That in poor years, drought years, as body condition became compromised, that they could actually have a pause in reproduction, not produce a fawn. Yearlings becoming pregnant. They're usually pregnant in animals in populations below carrying capacity, seldom pregnant in populations at or near. Corpora lutea counts of adult females. This is basically a measure of fertilization, ovulation fertilization. By taking reproductive tracts, looking at ovaries, you can actually determine what the conception rate is. So you know that's basically driven again by body condition. So at least partly you'll see higher incidence of twinning in animals that have higher body condition. So if you're looking at Corpora albicantia or Corpora lutea, you can actually determine kind of a pregnancy rate and look at the effect of body condition on that. Litter size, as I just indicated, a lot of twinning in populations below carrying capacity, a lot of singletons in populations at carrying capacity. Age at first reproduction for females, and this is a big one. We call it prima parity, just the first year that they reproduce. In populations well below carrying capacity, they've been able to actually have fawns get pregnant in whitetail populations. I don't know if that's been demonstrated for mule deer populations, but it definitely has for whitetail. So again, you could certainly have yearlings, which is up here, but you could certainly have yearlings becoming pregnant in a population below carrying capacity, where it would likely be older if you're at carrying capacity or above. Weight of neonates, this is basically just fawn weight. They're heavier in populations below K, lighter. Fawn weight is a is a significant indicator of overwinter survival. Idaho's done a significant amount of work weighing newborn fawns, and a weight at a certain date is correlated quite strongly with winter survival. Survivorship of young, not independent of weight of neonate, like we just talked about. And then the last one, age and extensive tooth wear. Browsers are particularly prone to high incidence of tooth wear at carrying capacity. So mule deer as a browser in a population at K or above K, you would expect to see excessive tooth wear, whereas below K, the idea is that the forage is higher quality, they don't have to eat as much, they don't have to break it down as much, so they might not be as many twigs and stems and having that tooth wear. So the idea behind the antlerless harvest was to provide data on body condition, marrow fat, heart fat, kidney fat, rump fat, etc. Provide data on reproduction. We asked the hunters to please indicate whether the animal that they harvested was with a fawn, was nursing, had evidence of nursing, and no fawn, so that we could begin to look at these things both as a function of body condition and as a function of age. It provides us data on rates of tooth wear. What we did there is we had 133 teeth that were submitted for cementum analysis to Matson's lab in Montana, and then we've got the jaws from all 133 of those, and we can compare the subjective analysis of tooth wear against jaw rings, and then compare that to arguably less subjective analysis of cementum annuli, and see if the chronological age is greater or less than the subjective determination by tooth wear. Evaluate for mineral deficiencies in diet. That's something that's tossed around. We don't know. We don't have any baseline information. A lot of animal physiologists, there's just kind of an absence of this information with respect to mule deer and a lot of wild ungulates. So again, at a minimum, maybe we can determine a baseline for one population. And test some bottom-up control ideas. So we had an antlerless hunt in Area 10 in 2009. The Commission approved a tag quota of 987 antlerless tags, which is 4% of the population estimate. The actual harvest was approximately 485, 2% of the population estimate. We received approximately 150 samples, and data analysis is ongoing. Preliminary findings. This is an age class structure, so this is a number of deer harvested by age for a total of 133 animals. Typically, you see a pretty linear relationship with decreasing age, decreasing number of animals per age as you increase. I don't know I guess looking at this data subjectively, a couple things that I thought were interesting is that out of 133 animals, we only had one animal 12, and we didn't have any animals come up over the age of 12. Looking at other studies, looking at other places, it's not uncommon to see 14, 15, 16-year-old deer. Certainly it wouldn't be a large part of your population, but I don't know that there's anything that we can necessarily say about this, but we can certainly use this distribution of ages in our population model to more accurately represent the population in our model with what's available. Another justification for the antlerless harvest was, a lot of this information can be obtained, your body condition information can be obtained from bucks, but the problem is you introduce a bias because there's a selective factor that hunters apply when hunting bucks, because you're automatically selecting for older age animals when you're selecting for antler size, whereas does, the belief is that they're harvested proportionate to their availability in the population. So the feeling is this is a more accurate representation of the age class structure of the population. Again, as a baseline, it would be interesting to see how this compares to other populations in the state, and how this may compare to the same population at a different point in time. The big thing really is the kind of the slope of this line, and then at what point you kind of run out of animals. I have no idea why we see this pattern here of high, low, high, low, high, low, high, low. I can't make any sense of that, and if we had confidence intervals on these, they would probably overlap. So that probably isn't a real difference, but at any rate, it's some of the best age class data that we've gotten in at least the last 40 years. Some other interesting findings: the ratio of male to female fawns in the harvest is 5 to 1. And as you look at our harvest data, there's a natural bias in reporting, and there's probably a bias due to the fact that male fawns or calves with elk they tend to wander a little bit further away from the mother. They're a little bit more adventurous, so they're more susceptible to harvest. But looking at the last few years that we've actually been requesting this information from hunters, every area in the state that we've had any kind of fawn or calf harvest has been reported at a 2 to 1 ratio. So I think the 2 to 1 ratio represents either the bias, the extra susceptibility that males have to harvest, or the bias, the hunter bias. But it was really surprising to me to see that 5 males per 1 female with somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 fawns in the harvest to have a ratio that skewed was surprising. Looking into the gender ratio, another thing, a lot of our models, we're assuming a 50-50 gender ratio at birth. So looking at some of the reasons why we may have this ratio, I found 3 significant studies that documented increased male to female ratios associated with poor nutritional quality forage. So the idea is that if a doe is in poor condition, it makes more sense for her to have male offspring to compete with rather than to have a female that's going to have offspring of her own to compete for forage. Even these studies, however, aren't as skewed as 5 to 1. You might see 60-40. I think the highest one was closer to 70-30, but nothing that even approximates this 5 to 1. Some other body condition findings. When we talk about body condition, I mean it's a little bit different than when you're thinking about humans, where we often think of fat levels as being unhealthy. In mule deer, typically the more fat you have, the better shape you're in. So there's a very predictable pattern of fat accumulation and metabolization. Starting first and foremost is the marrow fat. That's the fat that's seldom tapped. That's the last ditch reserve. It goes basically from the inside out in accumulation and the outside in as far as metabolization. And the three levels there, you go from the marrow fat to the organ fat. And with organ fat, we're talking about the heart, kidney, the pericardium, which is the sac that contains the heart. You get significant accumulations of fat on the pericardium. And then ultimately subcutaneous fat, which is that thick layer of rump fat that you see when you skin out these bucks that are in great shape. So with subcutaneous fat, the fawns had very little, and 10-year plus had very little. Otherwise, it was fairly unremarkable. So basically, the expectation typically is that fawns aren't going to have a lot of that fat. They don't have time between their birth in June and the fall to really build up that rumen flora to digest the really high value forage and really start to accumulate that fat. A lot of their energy is going into growth. They're putting down bone and muscle, and that fat storage is kind of a surplus measure. It was extremely variable in yearlings, and I think that variability probably points to variability on the landscape. It might also point to variability in timing of birth. Early born fawns or have a lot greater opportunity to accumulate that. They go through their first winter in better shape. They come out in better shape. So that could have been some previous years late born fawns as well. Appeared to be slightly lower. This is subcutaneous fat. Appeared to be slightly lower in successful does, which is a little bit counter. You think, well, if an animal had fawns, it was probably in really good condition, but it may simply be a representation of the cost of gestation and lactation, which are significant. Organ fat, heart, pericardium, and kidney, all highly variable. However, fawns had much lower levels of fat around the heart than the older aged animals. Again, most of that energy is going into growth, and at that point, that fat accumulation is really kind of surplus. Marrow fat, and again, looking at the fall of the year, all animals exhibited healthy level and condition of bone marrow. That's what you'd expect. When you see animals that are dipping into that marrow fat, it's typically late winter, early spring, where they've utilized all the subcutaneous fat, all the organ fat, and they're down to the marrow fat. And that marrow fat, when they're metabolizing marrow fat, they're at starvation level. Typically, animals that are utilizing marrow fat have a very low chance of survival. So production data, and this is probably where the most interesting results to date have been revealed, is with respect to production. What this graph shows is the percent of does with a fawn present by doe age. So again, remember, this is information that's being provided by hunters. There's bound to be some error in it, but interesting to me, of course you wouldn't expect fawns to have does present with them. But if you look at yearlings, this is saying that according to hunters' observations, that about 10% of the yearlings had does present. And remember, remember the characteristics associated with carrying capacity, that a population well below, you have a lot of yearlings getting pregnant. Population at, you don't. 2-year-olds, 25% of the 2-year-olds were reported to be with fawn, and then upwards of 40% of the 3-year-olds. It's hard to really say this is exactly what's going on. Another potential measure of success is looking at lactation, and we had the opportunity to evaluate a lot of this. A lot of it was provided by hunters, but it's consistent with the reports of animals with fawns, and that is that you're looking at only 5% of yearlings lactating and only 20% of 2-year-olds lactating. You go from 20 to 70%. So looking at hunter report of does with fawn and looking at evidence of lactation, what it seems to be suggesting to me is that really 3 years old is the age of primiparity in this population, which, I don't know, since we don't have this data for other areas. I look in the literature, I look at studies from Utah. To me, that seems old, but we don't know that. We would need to compare this with other populations, but at a very minimum, we have a baseline for this population that can be used again to look at this population in future years and can be used to compare other populations. And we can look at this kind of information to determine what kind of factors are limiting these populations. If we have a population that has twice the fawn ratio that this does, and we get the same data from that population, and we see that we have more than 20% of our 2-year-olds, then we might think that, well, perhaps there's a habitat issue in some of these areas. Additional analyses, we have the corporate albicantia counts yet to do. It's really, really difficult. Probably the most difficult aspect of this was for sportsmen was to identify the uterus in these animals. It's hidden amid a bunch of tissue. It's not something that you typically dig out. But I think we have 27 to 30, and we can go through those, dissect the ovaries, count corpora albicantia, and then look for a relationship between conception rates and age, or conception rates and body condition, see if there's any relationship there. With only 27 of them, or 30, somewhere in that neighborhood, by the time you break that down by age class, you're looking at a pretty small sample size. Any kind of statistical analysis wouldn't have a lot of power, but still be interesting from a descriptive standpoint. Microhistological analysis of feces, basically what we want to do there is take the fecal pellets, you send them to a lab, they'll prepare it on a slide, smear it out, and then based on plant parts identified through a scope, they're able to tell you specifically what these animals are eating. It wouldn't necessarily provide any information on the quality of that forage, just the content. It might be interesting just kind of looking at proportional abundance of some of those species in their diet. Could, I guess, take that information and then go back and measure digestibility of those forage species at some point. Mineral deficiencies, we took care from about 150 of these animals and would like to submit that to lab for analysis. Again, mineral deficiencies come up as a topic. We really don't have good data, good information on it, so at a very minimum it would establish a baseline for a population, and we could compare that in subsequent years or to other areas. And then I talked about tooth wear compared to chronological age already. We've got all the jaws from these animals and all the cementum annuli ages, and we can compare that. And then DNA as well. We've got tissue samples. I don't know at this point. DNA analysis is fairly expensive, and I don't have a specific hypothesis or question that warrants spending the money on the DNA analysis. But we have those tissue samples. We have a -40 deep freeze, and we can hang on to those for years if a question arises in the future. So at that point, I'd be happy to take any questions from the board. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Howell?
Tony, the original justification for this go hunt was until the carrying capacity was peaked out.
I know that was perhaps stated in, I don't know exactly how it was stated. I know that at one point in time it was presented to the commission as the department thought the population was at carrying capacity, and there probably should have been a caveat there that the department would like to get some data to determine where the population is relative to carrying capacity.
The way I read this presentation, it would seem to me like probably we weren't actually at carrying capacity, because the conditions seemed to be better to me, the way you presented it, than maybe you originally had thought to promote the hunt in the first place.
Well, I don't know if I come away with that same message. I guess what I see is that at a minimum we now have a baseline for a lot of biological parameters that we didn't have before. Now, we can go to the literature. We can look at the Oak Creek mule deer study. We can go through the literature and look at values for subcutaneous fat. We can look at values for production and conception rates, and we can compare them to this area. But it's probably not a fair comparison. What we probably need to do is compare areas more similar and compare these areas with themselves. And if we can get baseline data for these herds, like I believe we now have some pretty good data for the rubies, as conditions change, we have something to compare it to. If we see fawn ratios go up and we go out and determine that there are 2-year-olds, a significant number of 2-year-olds, then we can look back at this and say, well, remember in 2009 we only had 20% of our 2-year-olds reproducing. Now we have 50%. So not to suggest that habitat's the sole driving factor here. Body condition, I mean, a lot of these assumptions that we're making when we talk about habitat versus predators, we're assuming that the energetic costs of these animals haven't changed when we point to the habitat. There may be some significant energetic costs that we're not accounting for that are independent of habitat. The habitat could stay static, but if energetic costs increase, and I'm talking about the energetic costs associated with thermal regulation, if we have a hotter period in the summer, the metabolic costs of thermal regulation for mule deer are higher in the summer than they are in the winter. It takes more energy for a mule deer to stay cool in the summer than it does for them to stay warm in the winter, because they're so poor at dissipating heat. They don't have the sweat glands like elk might have. So I think at a minimum we have some good baseline data, and I think that we've learned maybe what not to do and what to do in the future as we're trying to assess the condition of these populations. And it's definitely a start, given that we really haven't done anything like this probably since the Ruby Butte study in the 60s.
The way I understand it, or the way it looked to me like the body condition was pretty much okay.
I guess there's a whole lot of noise there. There could be a problem with us trying to assess it in the fall. in the fall, if you think of the metabolic, the annual cycle of weight gain, weight loss, fat accumulation and loss in mule deer, in the fall of the year it should be at its peak. That's problematic. But if you want to take advantage of the opportunity to get data from hunters, it has to be in the fall. It's not palatable, and I don't think we'd support going out in the spring, which late winter, early spring, when they're going to be at the trough, at the worst point, and that's where you would really expect to see differences. So maybe one of the things that we learned is that the fall isn't the best time to try to discern body condition differences, because that's the time of year where all these animals are at the highest level because of their natural annual cycle.
Right, but it would seem to me like in the fall, they've already been hit hard by predators and fawns, so you're gonna have fewer fawns. But if the body condition is good, then, I don't know, it seemed to me like we probably haven't reached carrying capacity there.
I guess I would ask why you think we only have 20% of our 2-year-olds reproducing then. And I'm not saying that we're at carrying capacity, but that to me would be a reason for concern and possibly suggest that the population, if prima parity is 3 years of age, why would that be?
It seems to me like that in the fall, you've already been hit hard with the predators.
Right, but this is independent of predators. We're saying that only
We're not gonna
20%
have
of
fawns,
2-year-olds.
they're not still alive, they're
I know.
gone already.
Why do 70% of the 3-year-olds lactate when only 20% of the 2-year-olds lactate? Why would the coyotes?
Younger does less likely to take
All right.
care of her fawn.
Oh,
They're dumb.
all right. Let's see. We got. Let's go with Mr. Vogt. Were you done? I'm sorry. Were you done?
They're dumb. They're like a
Hey,
they're like a
one at a
2-year-old
time.
you.
Wait till you call
Excuse
on.
me.
All
I
right.
thought you already did.
We were making sure he was done. Sorry.
sorry, Chuck.
Mr. Vogler.
It's no different than a calf or a lamb. The young, or first time they have an offspring, they're dumb. They leave them. They don't know what they're doing. Sometimes the afterbirth wraps around their leg. They walk straight away and never look back.
So your assumption is that all those animals had fawns, but that they were eaten by predators because of poor maternal care. So if we can look at the uterus and we can do our corpora albicans counts and document that those animals did conceive, but didn't have a fawn, then that would support your hypothesis. However, if there were no corpora albicantia, which suggests they didn't conceive, which would be an artifact of poor body condition, then that shoots a hole in
Well,
your
at what
hypothesis.
stage do you check the corpus luteum for size? The other until the FSH takes over in the third part of the cycle, the follicles all look pretty relatively exactly the same. So if you're waiting 6 and 8 months to check the corpus luteal size before the follicle actually, the egg sheds, you don't have much. Do you?
There's quite a bit in literature about corpora albicantia. You're not using corpora lutea. And
What my biggest problem here is you say 1988 was the peak deer herds in this state. Is that correct?
according to our published report.
To your published reports. Do you know how many deer were taken in 1932 in the state of Nevada?
I have no idea.
311. Do you know how many deer tags were issued by Elko County in 1956? 32,000. And you talk about the bad winter of 92 and 93. In 1948 and 49, we had a hay lift all over the state. Livestock of all stripes died. There was nobody protecting wildlife. Then we had a second hay lift in 51 and 52. But for some reason, the recruitment, by 1956, Elko County alone was issuing 32,000 deer tags. So to me, in that same time frame, you also had almost 1 million head of sheep. You had 5 times more cattle than you do now. All those numbers are gone. We have 70,000 head of sheep. We have probably 25% of the cows that we had in those days. So the amount of forage available for wildlife is huge. A doe fawns in our area, mostly in June. The grass greens up in April. So they've had to get their milk flow up and their body score up for after, even pre-parturition. You've got practically all of April, all of May, they have the fawn, and if they're inexperienced, they do a poor job. An older doe maybe lost the fawn a year before to the, I'm out there all the time, and we never see a dry doe anymore. We used to years ago see dry does. They were barren. You could tell them. I mean, they had features, male features almost. Every one of those does is having 1 or 2 fawns. Even the elk have lots of twins. And in a very short window, when they're very small and very vulnerable, they're gone. Now, what other explanation can there be? You don't find dead fawns rotting. You find a little piece of skin, a little piece of a hoof, the end of the head, the hardest parts of it, or they're completely gone. And so nutrition is a fact. Anybody that's in the livestock business, nutrition is a factor, no question about it. The better nutrition, the better reproductive rate. But there's got to be something else going on out of there, and especially to say 1988 was the peak in the deer herds in this state. In 1969, Tony Lesperance shot 4 deer a year in different areas all around this state. They took those samples to the lab at the University of Nevada at Reno, and they analyzed them for competition with domestic livestock. And those, when we got to eastern Nevada, we did not get to shoot a deer, and us kids like to shoot the deer. And we got to shoot them when they were alive, but over there, the bar ditches were full of dead deer between Spruce Mountain and the Ruby Valley turnoff. So we had to dig samples out of the deer alongside the roads. It was unbelievable. They looked like bands of sheep going south. And for me, that is very hard for me to believe that, number one, we had a peak year in 1988, and yes, nutrition is a factor. During the 30s, we had terrible drought. I just cannot get my hands around that. And maybe you can't get your hands around without having that visual observation of an old guy that saw that. I mean, I can't believe that that's even close to what was here. Same way with sage hens. The skies used to turn black with them. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Shrum.
I've got a couple of questions here, Mr. Wasley. Just bear with me here on this.
Sir, we can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. This was, Mr. Wasley, this analysis and study was done in 2009, correct?
The harvest occurred in the fall of 2009, yes, sir.
Okay. And in Area 10, we went ahead and increased the doe hunt and gave out, well, didn't give out, but we sold approximately 1,000 tags. And out of that, 454 people were successful. Okay. Now, out of the 454, how many necropsies did you do on?
It was about 148, somewhere in that neighborhood. Different people, we requested 10 items. I can list all of them, but basically the head represented 5 samples. We got a CWD sample, we got a hair sample, we got a tissue sample, we got a tooth sample, we got the marrow from the jawbone, we got the heart and the sac, the pericardium, the kidney, we got fecal samples and a rump fat score. So we asked for 10 items. We told hunters if they submitted at least 8 of the 10 requested that we would enter them into a drawing for a rifle that Mule Deer Foundation had provided. So the 8 varied, but we got basically somewhere between 140 to 150 of most of those things.
Mm-hmm. And this was used to reflect on the quotas for 2010 for Area 10?
No, this didn't have any bearing on what.
It was just a study that you did.
Right, trying to understand the relationship of
the deer
these
condition.
animals. Right, trying to better understand factors that might be influencing not only production but survival.
Okay, now, instead of killing the additional almost 500 does, could we have instead maybe possibly used the junior tags for does? What I'm saying is...
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. You're saying that a certain portion of the junior hunters are going to harvest female deer anyway, so why kill an additional almost 500 does in one area when you have an opportunity? And that question has been brought up several times, and there's a couple factors there. Number one, there aren't as many females in the doe harvest as you might suspect. If you look at the rubies in particular, there's only about 60 total females from that harvest. So if you look at the compliance that we had, if you look at hunter success, look at 1,000 tags, we'll round it up for make it easy with the numbers. You look at 1,000 tags, you look at 50% hunter success for 500 harvested, and then you have about 33% compliance. It's voluntary compliance, so 33%. And that's incentivized with a raffle, and you still have a hard time with sample size. So if you had 60 does harvested through in the rubies, and you have 50%, well, I guess we wouldn't have to apply success because you know you have 60, but 33% compliance, you're looking at 20 animals over 12 age classes. You don't have enough in any one age class to begin to have, you know, large enough sample size to have power in any statistical analysis. So it's kind of anecdotal. The question's also been asked, well, that's just the rubies, but you could look at it across the state. The problem is, as you broaden your geographical area, you broaden the variation and you narrow the number of questions that you can ask because you're trying to ask it over a much broader area, and you have different factors and different influences in those areas. It's a good question. I think that there certainly are some opportunities that the department may be missing out on with respect to taking advantage of hunter harvested animals to measure things like body condition. I've got friends whose kids are always looking for science fair projects, and I hook them up with butchers and taxidermists all over the state just to try to anecdotally answer some of the questions I have. But they all take a lot of time and energy, but I think there are some legitimate opportunities there.
Yeah, it just seemed to me that, we're killing 500 extra does, and these numbers just pop out at me like something is wrong here.
I would like to point out that despite having killed 500 does, which was 2% of your population estimate at the time, that the population experienced a 6% increase between that harvest in 2010 and the flights that were completed this week. Classified over 9,500 deer in the fall, which is almost 2,000 animals more than the next highest level, with buck ratios at 30 and fawn ratios at over 50, which isn't outstanding, but certainly 10 fawns higher than it was last year. So, I guess I understand your concern over antlerless harvest. I think that the value in having the opportunity to put our hands on 500 animals and assess their condition. I mean, even if the value is to say, well, hey, they're not habitat limited, let's go kill predators. There's value in it. For us to sit here and continually debate top down versus bottom up without any data is foolish. So I think it's incumbent upon the department to investigate these things in the spirit of science and objectivity.
Okay, thank you.
You said you had an opportunity to, inspect 500, but you didn't inspect 500. You're talking about the number of samples, Tony. How many bodies did you autopsy? Was it 100 net, or not number of samples, but how many actual bodies did you autopsy? Deer.
I couldn't tell you. Most of them
25?
were samples that were brought in by hunters. We set up out here in the back. We draped plastic over all the picnic tables, and we sat out there for days, assessing fat and weighing.
How many hunters brought deer in? Over 25 or?
150.
150, so you had 150 bodies really, samples.
We didn't have 150 bodies. We had 150 sets of samples that varied anywhere from probably 2 or 3 to 10.
But you had 150 deer portions that you sampled.
Yes.
So that was a significant size.
Yeah.
And the other thing, could the commission get this slide presentation in a written form handed out to us? Because it has some good numbers in it that I think the commission would like to have it in a written form.
Yeah, we can just print this up just like it is.
Yeah, I think everyone would like that. Thank you.
Also on the website.
All right. I had a question, Tony. I think it's a little disturbing to me about the whole thing here is, when this hunt was sold to the commission as
Carrying capacity.
we're at carrying capacity. That's the way it was sold. And the study was thrown in as, and since we're doing that, we'll have a study too. And now it's being presented as that the whole idea was a study. And I sat here and we had that discussion. I was arguing against having this doe hunt. because it didn't make any sense to me that we're carrying the carrying capacity argument, but now the argument is being, it just seems that the motive behind the hunt at that time, it was all about carrying capacity. They're at carrying capacity. And now it's, well, because we wanted to do the, anyways. I need to stop living in the past. It's always a beautiful thing, but that's the way it was sold to the commission.
Chairman.
Yes, go right ahead, Mr. Macbeth.
Tony, I don't know what was going up in Elko County, but I can tell you in Cave Valley, for the year 2009, we had a very, very good rain year. And we also had a very, very good rain year for the year 2010. When you did when you decided to do the hunt, that would have been back in the spring. And so the body condition of the deer, coming out of 2008, which was a very dry year, is my recollection, you decided to do the doe hunt. And so by the time we get to the fall of 2009, with the good conditions that we had, is it any surprise at all that maybe the body condition was a little bit better than it otherwise would have been?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I guess you're right. I mean, the quota was approved by the commission in May, and in June of 2009, it was the wettest June in over 100 years in Elko County. And again, you never know what the weather's going to do. It was an incredible moisture year, great forage quality, great body condition, good antler growth. We saw several indices that indicated that, and it's not a surprise. I think there's two lessons there. We have a snapshot of a picture in time. There's some value in that, but where there's a lot more value is for comparative purposes in future years, perhaps on drier years. Maybe we learn that in the drier years, we're not seeing significant lactation or production in 3-year-olds. I don't know, but you're right, and I failed to point that out and recognize that. That's a good point.
Thank you. On this, in Area 10, there's going to be more survey flights this spring. Is that the current plan, do you understand it?
So, yes.
Yeah, if possible, it would be possible, Deputy Director, I'd like to, participate perhaps in one of those, if that's a possibility. Future, maybe somebody else in the commission. I want to get with Deputy Director to think that some of these is relevant. If anybody'd like to participate, they've been willing to do that in the past.
I think you need your line in there.
Huh? Yes, sir.
Do the flights?
Yeah. If you're interested, that's something they've been available in the flight in the past. I would just like to throw that out.
I think you need your lawyer along on the flight.
Yes, we need to be a lawyer slash spotter.
Bring a bag.
He said he needs his lawyer to go with him.
He needs the lawyer.
Liar.
Just kidding.
Okay. We're done. Let's see. That's it? All right, let's move